Immediately following the revocation of Manafort's bail, the president's personal lawyer, Rudolph Giuliani, gave a series of interviews in which he raised the possibility of a pardon for Manafort. Giuliani told the New York Daily News that, quote, when the whole thing is over, things might get cleaned up with some presidential pardons, unquote. Giuliani also said in an interview that although the president should not pardon anyone while the special counsel's investigation was ongoing, quote, when the investigation is concluded, he's kind of on his own, right? Unquote. In a CNN interview 2 days later, Giuliani said, quote, I guess I should clarify this once and for all. The president has issued no pardons in this investigation. The president is not going to issue pardons in this investigation. When it's over, hey, he's the president of the United States. He retains his pardon power. Nobody is taking that away from him, unquote. Giuliani rejected the suggestion that his and the president's comments could signal to defendants that they should not cooperate in a criminal prosecution because a pardon might follow, saying the comments were, quote, certainly not intended that way, unquote. Giuliani said the comments only acknowledged that an individual involved in the investigation would not be, quote, excluded from a pardon if, in fact, the president and his advisors came to the conclusion that you have been treated unfairly, unquote. Giuliani observed that pardons were not unusual in political investigations, but said, quote, that doesn't mean they're going to happen here. Doesn't mean that anybody should rely on it. Big signal is nobody has been pardoned yet, unquote. On July 31st, 2018, Manafort's criminal trial began in the Eastern District of Virginia, generating substantial news coverage. The next day, the president tweeted, quote, this is a terrible situation, and Attorney General Jeff Sessions should stop this rigged witch hunt right now before it continues to stain our country any further. Bob Mueller is totally conflicted, and his 17 angry Democrats that are doing his dirty work are a disgrace to the USA, unquote. Minutes later, the president tweeted, quote, Paul Manafort worked for Ronald Reagan, Bob Dole, and many other highly prominent and respected political leaders. He worked for me for a very short time. Why didn't government tell me that he was under investigation? These old charges have nothing to do with collusion, a hoax, unquote. Later in the day, the president tweeted, quote, looking back on history, who was treated worse? Al Capone, legendary mob boss, killer, and public enemy number one? Or Paul Manafort, political operative, and Reagan Dole darling, now serving solitary confinement, although convicted of nothing? Where is the Russian collusion, unquote. The president's tweets about the Manafort trial were widely covered by the press. When asked about the president's tweets, Sanders told the press, quote, certainly the president's been clear. He thinks Paul Manafort's been treated unfairly, unquote. On August 16, 2018, the Manafort case was submitted to the jury and deliberations began. At that time, Giuliani had recently suggested to reporters that the special counsel investigation needed to be, quote, done in the next 2 or 3 weeks, unquote, and media stories reported that a Manafort acquittal would add to criticism that the special counsel investigation was not worth the time and expense, whereas a conviction could show that ending the investigation would be premature. On August 17, 2018, as jury deliberations continued, the president commented on the trial from the South Lawn of the White House. In an impromptu exchange with reporters that lasted approximately 5 minutes, the president twice called the special counsel's investigation a, quote, rigged witch hunt, unquote. When asked whether he would pardon Manafort if he was convicted, the president said, quote, I don't talk about that now. I don't talk about that, unquote. The president then added, without being asked a further question, quote, I think the whole Manafort trial is very sad when you look at what's going on there. I think it's a very sad day for our country. He worked for me for a very short period of time. But you know what? He happens to be a very good person. And I think it's very sad what they've done to Paul Manafort, unquote. The president did not take further questions. In response to the president's statements, Manafort's attorney said, quote, Mr. Manafort really appreciates the support of President Trump, unquote. On August 21st, 2018, the jury found Manafort guilty on 8 felony counts. Also on August 21st, Michael Cohen pleaded guilty to 8 offenses, including a campaign finance violation that he said had occurred, quote, in coordination with and at the direction of a candidate for federal office, unquote. The president reacted to Manafort's conviction that day by telling reporters, quote, Paul Manafort's a good man, unquote, and, quote, it's a very sad thing that happened, unquote. The president described the special counsel's investigation as, quote, a witch hunt that ends in disgrace, unquote. The next day, the president tweeted, quote, I feel very badly for Paul Manafort and his wonderful family. Justice took a 12-year-old tax case, among other things, applied tremendous pressure on him, and unlike Michael Cohen, he refused to make up stories in order to get a deal. Such respect for a brave man, unquote. In a Fox News interview on August 22, 2018, the president said, quote, Cohen makes a better deal when he uses me, like everyone else. And one of the reasons I respect Paul Manafort so much is he went through that trial. You know they made up stories. People make up stories. This whole thing about flipping, they call it. I know all about flipping, unquote. The president said that flipping was, quote, not fair and almost ought to be outlawed, unquote. In response to a question about whether he was considering a pardon for Manafort, the president said, I have great respect for what he's done in terms of what he's gone through. He worked for many, many people, many, many years, and I would say what he did, some of the charges they threw against him, every consultant, every lobbyist in Washington probably does, unquote. Giuliani told journalists that the president, quote, really thinks Manafort has been horribly treated and that he and the president had discussed the political fallout if the president pardoned Manafort. The next day, Giuliani told the Washington Post that the president had asked his lawyers for advice on the possibility of a pardon for Manafort and other aides and had been counseled against considering a pardon until the investigation concluded. On September 14th, 2018, Manafort pleaded guilty to charges in the District of Columbia and signed a plea agreement that required him to cooperate with investigators. Giuliani was reported to have publicly said that Manafort remained in a joint defense agreement with the president following Manafort's guilty plea and agreement to cooperate, and that Manafort's attorneys regularly briefed the president's lawyers on the topics discussed and the information Manafort provided in interviews with the special counsel's office. On November 16, 2018, the special counsel's office disclosed in a public court filing that Manafort had breached his plea agreement by lying about multiple subjects. The next day, Giuliani said that the president had been, quote, upset for weeks, unquote, about what he considered to be, quote, the un-American, horrible treatment of Manafort, unquote. In an interview on November 28, 2018, the president suggested that it was, quote, very brave, unquote, that Manafort did not flip. If you told the truth, you go to jail. You know this flipping stuff is terrible. You flip and you lie, and you get the prosecutors will tell you 99% of the time they can get people to flip. It's rare that they can't. But I had 3 people, Manafort, Corsi, I don't know Corsi, but he refuses to say what they demanded. Manafort, Corsi, redacted, HOM. It's actually very brave. In response to a question about a potential pardon for Manafort, the president said, it was never discussed, but I wouldn't take it off the table. Why would I take it off the table? Unquote. Redacted. Harm to ongoing matter. redacted, harm to ongoing matter. How many times do I say this? Redacted, harm to ongoing matter. 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 Redacted, harm to ongoing matter.